You've used a wheel today without noticing. It got you to work. It rolled your suitcase through an airport. It spun quietly inside the motor of every fan cooling the room you're sitting in right now. The wheel feels so basic, so obvious, that it's hard to imagine a version of humanity without it. But for most of human history, there was no wheel. Not because your ancestors were incapable of building one. Not because the idea never crossed anyone's mind. The real answer is far stranger. Humans hunted mammoths, crossed oceans on rafts, and carved tools with astonishing precision, tens of thousands of years before anyone rolled anything anywhere. So what took so long? Here's the twist most people never learn. The wheel wasn't held back by a lack of intelligence. It was held back by a lack of reason to need one. Archaeologist David Anthony, who has spent decades studying the earliest evidence of wheeled transport in the steppes of Eastern Europe and Central Asia, traced the first confirmed wheels to roughly 5,500 years ago. Not to a brilliant lone inventor. Not to a single flash of insight. The wheel appears almost simultaneously across several regions, which tells you something important. It wasn't waiting on genius. It was waiting on circumstances. Think about what a wheel actually requires to be useful. It's not enough to carve a circle. You need a flat, hard surface to roll it on. You need an axle strong enough to bear weight without snapping. You need draft animals large and tame enough to pull a loaded cart, or a population dense enough to make hauling heavy goods worth the effort in the first place. Your ancestors, for most of their existence, had none of these conditions. Picture a small hunter-gatherer band moving through dense forest, rocky hillside, or soft desert sand. A wheel in that environment isn't a shortcut. It's a liability. It gets stuck in mud. It snaps on stone. It requires roads that don't exist yet, pulled by animals that haven't been domesticated yet, to move goods that a group small enough to carry on their backs doesn't yet produce in bulk. In that world, a person is simply a better vehicle than a wheel. Anthropologist Jared Diamond has pointed out something that reframes the entire question. Complex technology doesn't spread because it's clever. It spreads because it solves a problem people are already straining against. Before agriculture, before permanent settlements, before surplus grain that needed to move from field to storehouse to market, there was no straining. There was no traffic jam of goods waiting to be hauled. There was only what a person could carry, which was usually enough. Everything changed with farming. Once humans began producing more food than they could immediately eat, they needed to move it. Grain had to travel from field to village. Building stone had to travel from quarry to temple. Suddenly, weight and distance became a daily problem instead of an occasional inconvenience. That pressure, not sudden brilliance, is what pushed the wheel into existence. Even then, the wheel didn't appear everywhere at once. Some of the most sophisticated civilizations in human history never developed wheeled transport at all. The Inca Empire built extensive road networks stretching across the Andes, engineered irrigation systems, and constructed cities of astonishing precision, all without a single functional cart. Historian and archaeologist Michael Mosley, who studied Andean engineering extensively, noted that the terrain itself made the wheel almost pointless. Steep mountain paths favor llamas and human porters over anything rolling on an axle. In a landscape like that, a wheel isn't an upgrade. It's simply the wrong tool. This is the part that quietly rewires how you think about invention. You tend to imagine technology as a ladder, each rung strictly better than the last, climbed in the same order by everyone. But the wheel proves that isn't true. Invention isn't a straight line of progress. It's a negotiation between a problem and its environment. Remove the problem or change the environment enough, and the invention simply never has a reason to exist. Once the conditions were finally right, though, the wheel spread with startling speed. Within a few centuries of its first appearance on the Eurasian steppe, wheeled carts show up in Mesopotamia, in the Indus Valley, across Europe. Combined with domesticated oxen and horses strong enough to pull real weight, the wheel didn't just move goods faster. It reorganized how far a civilization could reach. Trade routes lengthened. Cities grew larger, because for the first time, Food and materials could travel further than a single person could carry them on foot. There's something worth sitting with here. You live inside the wheel's aftershock, whether you notice it or not. Every road, every supply chain, every delivery that arrives at your door depends on a chain of wheeled logistics your ancestors spent nearly all of human history without. The technology that feels most fundamental to modern life is, on an evolutionary timescale, remarkably recent. And this pattern didn't stop with carts and axles. Think about how often you assume a new piece of technology should have arrived sooner than it did. Why didn't earlier engineers build the steam engine? Why did it take so long to invent something as simple as the wheeled suitcase, decades after airports were filled with people struggling under heavy bags? In nearly every case, the answer echoes the same one buried in the steppe 5,500 years ago. The idea usually existed long before the need became painful enough, or the surrounding conditions became ready enough to make it worth building. Your ancestors weren't slower thinkers than you. They were simply solving the problems directly in front of them, using exactly the tools their world demanded. The wheel wasn't a triumph of intelligence over ignorance. It was a quiet, patient answer to a question that hadn't been asked loudly enough yet. So the next time you roll a suitcase through an airport, or watch a delivery truck pull away from your curb, remember that the wheel beneath it took most of human history to become necessary. Not because no one could imagine it, because for a very long time, nobody actually needed it to imagine anything at all. You've used a wheel today without noticing. Now you know why it took your species this long to need one.